All right, everyone. Do you think we could get started? I think we're going to get started. Okay, wonderful. Well, happy Advent, everyone. A joyful Advent to you. We are so glad that you decided to come in here to listen to Delegate Carrie Coyner, our beloved Sean Winetta, and we're also going to be joined, and this is a big deal too, by the Virginia Director of the Department of Corrections, Chatwick Dotson, who is on his way, and he will be joining Delegate Coyner up there on the stage in a minute. So welcome to Faith in Action, about basic and higher education in the Virginia prison system, making that more accessible to all people who are incarcerated. This series is about how do we turn our faith into action? How do we take the values that we are formed in when we worship together and go out into the public square and advocate for the poor, the oppressed, the least of these. So here we are, and there's no population that probably is more invisible to us than those behind bars. So I'm going to open with this prayer and then turn it over to Sean. Let us pray. O loving and gracious God, we thank you for making known your presence among us this morning in our worship, our song, and our sacraments. We ask you, God, during this Advent season, that you draw near to all who are incarcerated and living in captivity. Comfort them and their families. Renew their hope in your liberation and love. And draw near to us that we may ensure all living behind bars have full access to basic and higher education, so that they may learn and grow in your spirit of wisdom and truth. May our Department of Corrections around Virginia become centers of learning, enlightenment, discovery, and renewal, where we recognize and respect God's image in every human being. We ask this in the name of the Christ child who comes to set us all free. Amen.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking some time from your morning and coming in and learning about what's a very very important topic. Certainly for me, most of you know those of you that don't know me, I'm sorry. My name's Sean Winetta. I've been a member here for about 4.5 years. I always like to blame Fletcher Lowe for my presence here, not just at St. Paul's, but very much so in Richmond as well. And I know those of us here that knew him miss him very much. But that's how I came to St. Paul's and had the great fortune of being able to engage with the congregation and parish in important discussions like this one. Um, I want to introduce Delegate Carrie Coyner. She always tells me to call her Carrie. We've have become friends in my work in the legislature, and she has been a champion for issues to address people that are behind bars in Virginia, whether they're in our jails or in our prisons. And I always like to ask people when we do these sessions to tell us a little bit, not just about yourself, but why as Gwen mentioned, sometimes people that are incarcerated are sort of the furthest from people's center of attention, and why it became an important issue to you, to not just on prison education, but just to address issues for people that are incarcerated as well.
Sure. Well, thank you, Sean, and thank you all for having me this morning. I joked to begin with, I've been invited here twice now, a decade apart, so hopefully it's less time before I come back and visit with you all again. I was here actually in 2014, right around then, might have been the year before. Betsy Carr was a dear friend back then when I was on the school board in Chesterfield County, and I came because I had been out speaking about where housing and education meet, and talking within our suburbs at the time, the board, about how important it was for our lower income students that we don't isolate the conversations about where people live and their opportunities for housing and where children are able to find the best education in our suburbs. And you all hosted me here back then. That's really sort of the foundation of where my passion for, I would say, serving started, was on the school board. But that began because of my own personal faith and my own journey with God. I actually started my service in mission work with a group of school teachers. We were serving in a lower income apartment community, mainly single female led households with a heavy gang presence that was there in the afternoons and evenings while moms were still at work, because they knew there were a lot of young men in one place that they could go in and influence. And so we started working there. I continued some of that mission work over the years when I got onto the school board, starting some learning centers in some of our mobile home communities. And then once I was on the school board, we have an amazing sheriff in Chesterfield, Sheriff Carl Leonard. And he was working on helping those who were incarcerated in his jail, suffering from substance use disorder, find their road to recovery. And he came to me as a school board member and he said, almost every story of men and women in my jail, something started in middle school or high school and they became addicted. And I'd like to do more work before they end up here, right? When they're younger. And so we started partnering together and we envisioned a recovery high school in Chesterfield, a place where young people could get help before they become adults, and jail ends up where they get help. So I went and visited his jail. And when I walked in to the women's area, one of the women who was sitting there, I graduated high school with. And she was one of our top softball players at our high school. She was just a rock star softball player. And I think it was her 11th grade year, she had a major injury from softball, and the doctor prescribed her pain medications. And she was too afraid to tell even her mother that she couldn't stop taking them. And that's what led to her road to addiction, which led to me running into her in Chesterfield County Jail. She is out and on her recovery journey, which is permanent. And now she is a peer recovery specialist and works for the county where she was incarcerated. Yes, that is a praise God thing. But that's what got me interested the day I walked in and really said, but for one moment different in life, right? I didn't get injured in high school, but for one thing, any one of us could be there, or our brother, or our sister, or our child. And how do we help those who are incarcerated find a better future, right? Find a place that when you leave there, that you have what you need to be successful and not end up back there. So that's really what got me connected and started in this particular area, looking at jails and prison work.
So it's always a story that sort of helps people connect to this type of work, and I want to set the table a little bit of sort of where we've been in the journey of uh, education, higher education in prison, and sort of a lot of things that have happened over the last 30 years, and sort of where we are today. So back in the 1990s, there was sort of a general sort of movement to be tough on crime, and there's a lot of things that came out of that, lots of legislation and policy that came out of that, particularly out of Washington D.C. And one of the things that happened with that was the elimination of eligibility for Pell Grant money for people that were incarcerated. It used to be that people that were incarcerated were able to obtain higher education with assistance from the federal government through Pell Grants until about 1994, and that was eliminated. Fortunately, in the last couple of years, uh, the federal government has determined that actually, in fact, we should be allowing access to Pell Grants to people that are incarcerated. So there is opportunity now for uh, not just people that are incarcerated, but for our local community colleges as well as our state universities to be able to sort of access this large population of people that are eligible for this education and for this money. Right now, Virginia Department of Corrections incarcerates about 23,000 people on any given day. We have 59 jails in Virginia that similarly incarcerate about the same amount of money they incarcerate on any given day, between 23 and 25,000 people. That is, the jails are a little bit more transient because it's people serving very short sentences or just coming in their pre-trial and they're sort of waiting to go to court. But people sort of cycle in and out of the jails a lot more quickly than they do in and out of our prisons. So we really are sort of more focused on our prisons here because that's where people are going to be there and they're going to have more time to actually access these educational opportunities, whether that's adult basic education or higher education through one of our community colleges or through one of our universities. So that money is now available to people that are incarcerated where it has not been for about 30 years. So that's sort of setting the table a little bit. And recently, the governor issued an executive order back in August, and it was really dealing with reentry and helping deliver services to people that are incarcerated, not just while they're incarcerated, but also when they're released. We have about 60,000 people that are on probation right now, that are many of whom are also eligible for Pell money to access our universities here in Virginia. So, sort of setting that table a little bit, this came to you, I think, sort of caught your attention a little bit last year. And can you tell us a little bit of sort of how it got your attention and some of the work that you've done on it in the meantime?
Sure. So my number one passion is public education. So that's what got me into the legislature. I believe with every ounce of my being that education is the best path forward for us as our local communities, as the Commonwealth, but for as a country, right? The more educated our children are, the better we all go on for generation to generation. So public education is my passion. And over the past few years, I had been carrying some bills that impacted the entire education system in Virginia. So a few years ago, I carried the Virginia Literacy Act. Last year, I carried a large bill around special education reform. And as I was talking with one of my dear friends, she's a professor at UVA Law School. Her background is she was a special education attorney for families out of Massachusetts. We were talking about other populations that really needed more support in education. And she was like, I really think we ought to tackle the incarcerated, right? We really ought to tackle this education issue. She was like, no one's really across the country doing it really, really well. And there's some big opportunities for us to help. At the same time, Betsy Carr last year was extremely passionate, especially about our GED programs and trying to help individuals who needed some of those basic education supports. And Virginia Interfaith Center was really focused on the higher ed piece as well. So we sort of had this perfect storm of some things happening all at the same time that allowed us to start researching. So I'm an attorney by background. I went to University of Richmond for law school, UVA for undergrad, and every year I partner with a couple of law school students at UVA and work with them on research. And this was the topic that I asked two law school students to help me with. And so, two young people researched across the country, interviewed dozens of experts, both in education and in corrections and in higher ed, and helped us interview and work with every stakeholder group in Virginia to put legislation together. So there are three key things that we were trying to focus everybody around the table on. One is the reduction in recidivism, right? Number one. And I'm sorry, I'm literally at that age. I'm going to the eye doctor on Monday where half the time I need my glasses and half the time I have to take them off to see, and I'm doing this. So I don't want to mess the numbers up. So I want to make sure I get these right for you all as I look at this. In recidivism, for those who participated in education while in corrections, they have a 43% lower chance of recidivating than those who do not. All right. So, number one reason why this is important is the reduction in recidivism. The number two is the preparation for reentry. If you have not spent time with those who are incarcerated, one of the things that's really hard is how we go back into community, right? How we go back into our families, how we go back. And a huge piece of this education is for jobs. And what data tells us is that by the end of the 2020 era, right, as we head into 2030, 70% of jobs in our country will require some form of post-secondary education. So that's part of that reentry that we need to focus and prepare for jobs. And then the third is if we really boil it down, which we do often in the legislature, to cost, right? What's the cost benefit analysis of this? And what research showed is that for every $1 that we spend in education and corrections, we save $4 to $5 in reincarceration costs. That's a really good investment when you look at where we're spending our dollars. So we sort of focused around those three things as we approached and talked about what are the different levels of education we want to focus on. Um, Sean mentioned about 23,000 who are incarcerated at any one time. Um, Out of the about 23,000, we have about 2,700 men and women who are on a wait list for basic education services. A wait list. That means they're eligible, they want basic education, but there's no service right now to provide it. So that's just for basics, what Betsy Carr was working on last year, those GED services, those basic education. We have 37% of that 23,000 who do not have a high school equivalent diploma at all. That's a large percent of our population. And we have 14,300 of those 23,000 who are eligible for post-secondary coursework. So we have a large number who do have that high school equivalent and could go on to get additional skills. So those are some of the statistics and numbers that we put out for folks to see. It makes good sense for a lot of reasons to do this, regardless of where you line up, right? Sometimes politically, people have different reasons for how they support things. We really felt like this was gave everybody involved a reason to jump on board and support it.
Some of those numbers are particularly interesting, and I, this might not be the crowd for the fiscal part of it, but it's a little over $7,000 a year, I believe, of Pell eligibility for every person that is has access to it. And you said I think 14,000 and 14,300 people in our prisons right now today are eligible for this Pell money, and those are federal dollars that can be brought into Virginia and into our local community colleges and into our state universities, which adds up to a huge fiscal benefit. If we look at sort of who's best equipped in Virginia to deliver these services, it's probably the community colleges. I know that's sort of been a heavy focus of sort of this effort that we've been sort of working on the last year. The community colleges are regionally distributed. They are, generally in, pretty local to these, where our prisons are, and they're able to deliver these services. So that's a huge influx of cash to improve and to bolster and reinforce our community college system as well. Some of them, we have one of the best community college systems in the country. But there's some that could certainly use some help and could certainly use an influx of cash. And here's an opportunity for them to benefit from this resource as well. So there's going to be more money going back into the communities, back into local infrastructure, creating more opportunities for work for the people that are local to that university or to that community college. So there's a lot of, as Carrie mentioned, there's a lot of different reasons to get on board with this, sort of wherever you might sort of lie on the political spectrum of why this is a big benefit. Carrie talked a little bit about reducing recidivism, and one of the things that the governor's executive order that I mentioned earlier did is sort of shifts a bit of a focus. Recidivism, and we hear that as sort of like the national measure of people returning from incarceration. And if you sort of think about it, recidivism actually really just measures failure, right? It says, okay, recidivism is generally measured by 3 years after somebody's released from incarceration, and it measures whether or not they went back to jail if they were arrested again. So it really measures failure rather than success. So one of the really great things that this governor did was in that executive order created success factors. And it's 6 data-driven points, and I won't jump into all of them, but one of them is education. Education is one of the things that we can point to as one of the greatest indicators of successful reentry upon release. Age is the number one. Education is number two. Can't really do anything about the age piece, but we can deliver services and we can deliver education to people that are incarcerated, and we can do it with a lot of assistance from the federal government rather than just having to worry about it ourselves. Um, so, Carrie, sort of off of all of that, and the director is texting me now, so I'm going to throw it to Carrie and find out where the director is. Um, So you talked a little bit about how recidivism, hits on this and how we want to see people successful and getting the services that they need. You mentioned some of your faith journey earlier. One of the things we like to talk about here is why this matters and how this intersects with faith and why it's important to living out our baptism as personal mission of mine. But how does it intersect with your faith and why is it important to you in your faith journey? Because you're obviously across the street here casting votes and doing this work, and how does that help shape the policy that you move forward?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Well, my life verse, and if you visit any office, my law office, my delegate office, my home, my kitchen, my bedroom, is Micah 6:8. And every morning I get up and I do ask God every day, help me to, do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you. And that's been my life's mantra for many, many years, that life verse for me. And I think that is when we look at our role in this. It is no secret I am on the right side of the aisle in politics, and I've spent a lot of time talking to my colleagues about, we can be for justice as we should be, but also that mercy layer that comes as well, right? So, folks, we have a lot of folks who are incarcerated who there are victims out there, right? And they're not at a place where they should be out walking on our streets right now. But there is hope for every single person that they change their life and then they want a new path. And we should be there for that journey. That is where we are called to be. And so that starts along the way, hopefully intervening with people. I think the best interventions we can do is with our young people. Because I can tell you, if you go spend some time in our prisons and in our jails, almost every story goes back to if someone had just intervened at a different point early on in life for one of those young men or women. So I think that's a big piece for us. Where do we intercede? Those of us who are Christ followers, where do we intercede and walk with somebody on their own journey? We came from my better half is back there, Jamie. We came from our own church service this morning, and we were singing this song. It's called "Speak Jesus." And I am not one that when I'm out in the General Assembly or out with clients that I am um, telling them you have to believe, you have to do this. But my hope is that by virtue of how I've interacted with them, that when they do realize that they want to follow, that they go, man, that person really spoke like Jesus, right? Like that's what I want people to feel through my legislation that I bring and how I treat people and interact with. And so for me, I think that's the biggest thing in this area is that in our faith, can people see it in how we act and in how we walk and in how we treat others, is my hope. So that's where my faith intersects.
That's great. So thanks for sharing that. And unfortunately, the director is unable to join us today. There's a large hearing. There's a committee hearing tomorrow of the House Public Safety Committee, and he's preparing for that. So he sends his regrets, and I'll very quickly read what he has. He said, please express my apologies, and education is my top priority, and I 100% support the work of Delegate Coyner and Delegate Carr in this area. It's one of the things I pledged the Ombudsman's Committee, which is an oversight committee for the Department of Corrections, on Friday. We're improving bandwidth and infrastructure, trying to make education available to everyone within our facilities. The director is somewhat new in this position. If he would have been on stage here, would have been a full UVA undergrad take over the stage. But a very interesting guy. He is an attorney also by trade, and was a Commonwealth attorney down in Wise County, and then later on a judge, a circuit court judge, and drug recovery court judge in Wise County, and then a dean of, I believe, UVA Wise Law School, and then became the chair of the Virginia Parole Board for a couple of years under Governor Youngkin, and then about a year ago, a little over a year ago, the director of the Department of Corrections, Harold Clark, decided to retire, and then Chair Dotson of the parole board was promoted to be the director of the Department of Corrections, and I've been very, very enthused by his leadership there. The people that have been in power in leadership before had been there for quite a while, and I think it was time to move forward with some new a new perspective. And he doesn't bring up correctional background, which has been really wonderful, which has I think been one of the reasons why he's been great and encouraged to work with Delegate Coyner and Delegate Carr and others who are trying to make a difference in our corrections. We've been a bit stagnant in how we've been addressing corrections for a long time, and so there's some really interesting things happening within the agency. It is the largest agency in the Commonwealth, so 12,000 people employed, $1.5 billion budget, and 23,000 people incarcerated. And one thing that's sort of interesting about this, and Della Coyner hit on some of this, uh, while there are 23,000 people incarcerated in our prisons right now, there's a lot of that that actually turns over every year. About between 10 and 12,000, about 1,000 people a month are released from our prisons every year. So, for context, last year, uh, George Mason University, our largest state university that graduated the largest class in history, they conferred about 10,000, whether it's degrees or certificates, on students and participants in their programs last year. So we have more people getting out of prison every year than George Mason is graduating every year. There are huge workforce development gaps in Virginia right now, whether that is in the shipyards down in Norfolk, or tech in Northern Virginia, or healthcare and government here in Virginia. And we're desperately looking for people to fill these roles. And this is just one other opportunity, I think, to fill these workforce development gaps that you have. And I know Chesterfield especially is a bit of a hotbed of jobs with Lego and a lot of other companies coming there. How can this sort of help support the workforce gaps that we have in Virginia right now?
Sure. Well, I represent in Chesterfield County, the largest manufacturing area in the whole region. So I'm home to the brand new Lego manufacturing facility. It's the only one in North America. And it's, in fact, my next door neighbor. I can walk to it. It's about a mile from my house. I'm home to the world's largest indoor vertical farm. Plenty strawberries are being grown. It is the coolest new environmental friendly, pesticide free way to grow. And their first produce are strawberries. And then I asked for blueberries to be next, but I think I'm losing and I'm going to get lettuce, but that's okay. Um, but I have any manufacturer that makes stuff in my little area. And I spend a lot of time visiting them. And I was just last month at Niagara Water Bottling Company, which bottles water. And they put any label you want on it. So if it's a Pepsi type of water, what is that, Dasani? They've got, the minerals that they add into their water and they put a label on it. And then if you go to Wawa or Costco, you name it, they put someone's label on it. So I tell my children, we're not buying bottled water. It's Chesterfield County water. We're going to drink it from home. But when I go visit the manufacturers, no one says, I need to find another executive to join my company. The only positions that Niagara had open and that they constantly have open are for folks who can fix things. Because a lot of stuff has been moved to robotics and machinery, but they still need people with the skills of welding, of plumbing, of electrical, of machinery to be able to fix things. And those vacancies are the same there as when I go to Advan 6, as when I go visit West Rock, as when I go visit Amazon. All of those companies in my area need individuals, not top executives. They need people who have skills that you can fix things. So when we look at when COVID hit, we shut down most education services in our prisons and jails because we were trying to keep people from mixing around, right? To keep people safe from their health perspective. And we never brought a lot of that back. And we saw huge vacancy rates stay in our education in our prisons. So the vacancy rates are much higher than in our K 12. And those are very high right now. So, I went and visited one of our correctional facilities 2 months ago, and they have 3 different wings that they could be running education programs in, but they only have enough staff to keep one open, and there's a wait list because they just don't have the teachers. So it's an area where out in our communities, we have a high demand and desire for more people with skill sets. And we have an opportunity with what we know are many individuals who, if we can figure out that education piece, can leave the facilities and come back out into the community ready to take on jobs that are here and ready and available and are not being filled today. So big opportunity there to match those skills up.
And this Pell money is not just somebody that wants to go and get a degree in biometrics or in medicine or something like that. This Pell money is available to people that are seeking is also available to people that are seeking technical skills, people that want welding opportunities, want manufacturing, want to go into manufacturing. And these are not just I talk a lot about this. I go to conferences and I speak sort of all over, and I talk a lot about when people are coming out of incarceration, particularly long-term incarceration, that we don't need jobs, we need careers. People that go into jobs or just go into fast food or some sort of labor or entry level service industry opportunities are generally just one COVID infection or one blown tire away from being desperate again. And generally, what they're going to do is they're going to resort back to what they know and the way they know that they can meet those needs. And these are really great opportunities to whether it's we had a big job fair back in October. The organization that I work for over at the convention center, and we went to Lego and we went to Plenty, and we filled the room with a couple thousand jobs for people that are returning from incarceration to come and seek. And they were not just jobs, they were career opportunities. And when we were talking with Lego and we were talking with Plenty and some of these and West Rock and these other people that were in Carey's district and here in Richmond, city of Richmond showed up really big with the mayor, and they were bringing, these jobs were walking in the door entry level 50, 60, $70,000 a year, which is for somebody coming home from prison that's been incarcerated for 10, 15, or 20 years, that's the biggest opportunity that they've ever had in their life. um, Start thinking about some questions as well. I'm going to come out here very shortly and take questions from the audience here for Delegate Coyner and to keep the discussion going. um, I wanted to hit on one more thing um, about sort of the opportunities that this provides and what the impacts that you've seen. And I want to talk about one individual that's a friend of yours, Darchi Lewis, I believe. So there's a gentleman that's one of her constituents that I had the opportunity to spend some time with on Friday during a meeting across the street at the General Assembly here, who's had some of these opportunities, and I know is a personal friend of yours. So just to make it a little bit more personal and more individual, can you tell us a little bit about Darchi and how opportunities like this have been able to, impact his life and the impact that he's now having in your community?
Sure. So I met Diarchi 7 years ago when I was door knocking in Hopewell. And I walked up on his porch and it was hot. It was summer. I was campaigning. It was just miserable. And he looked at me and and his brother, his neighbor was sitting on the porch and he said, "What is a young white girl like you doing walking up on our porch?" And I said, "Oh, I'm out here because I'm running for office." And he said, "Well, let me get you a bottle of water." So that's how I met Diarchi. We stood out on his front porch. His wife, Shamika, came out and she wanted to know what I was doing in their neighborhood. They said, "We haven't had anybody stop on our front porch ever to ask us to vote for anything." And I said, "Well, I hope you'll consider it," and went on about my way. And we stayed in touch. His wife, Shamika, would contact me on occasion about needs that were happening in the community, and we became very good friends. And D. Archie was doing some ministry work for those in recovery and for those who had been involved in gangs and group violence. And he found himself at a unique place where he has a gift of being able to speak to young people. He really does. It's a gift. Some of us are meant to work with youth and some of us are not. He's meant to. Uh, but his criminal background made it where the insurance of our school systems, he was no longer able to work. And so I fought really, really hard to get his case in front of the governor to look at giving him some relief from some of what kept following him. We were able to get most of that actually taken care of. But we still had some issues. And so our police chief ended up hiring him. He could hire him to do the work, and the school division's insurance wouldn't allow him to. So he it was now able to be employed by our police and to do gang intervention work with young men who are most likely, statistically, to be preyed on by gang activity that's happening in our city. So I represent the city of Hopewell. If you're not exactly sure where that is, it's kind of in between here and city of Petersburg. And we have one of the highest gang activity rates anywhere in the region. So most things that go on happen between Petersburg, Hopewell, and some certain areas of the city of Richmond, and it's a triangle effect. They're not isolated. They move from one area of our cities to the other and back around again. D'Archie is an individual who grew up in that environment, ended up serving time because of that environment and choices that he made, but he's committed his life and his faith to live that out to make sure other young men don't end up in the journey that he took. And that's what he believes his path is in this world, is to do that. So he actually, I helped him, I nominated him for the Department of Corrections Oversight Committee. And he texted me on Thursday and he said, Ms. Coyner, I am so nervous because they told me I have to go back into a prison to visit it. And I haven't been in there since I was stuck there and couldn't leave. And he said, I don't know what to do. So I called another delegate, Jed Arnold, who serves with me in the legislature, and I said, one of my dearest friends is nervous as can be about this first day of serving someone who was previously incarcerated on an oversight commission. And here's a little bit about him. I hope you will, befriend him and walk with him on Friday. And D'Archie sent me a photo of the two of them together and just said, I would have never believed in my wildest dreams that I would be helping to make sure other people have a different path than I did as well. So, really cool opportunity. And he's continuing his education. He's passionate about young people and education, and D'Archie's determined to keep improving his own skills so that he can help other young men as well.
So who has, want to see who has some questions here for Delegate Coyner? We have a couple, and I will come out. Okay.
I'm sorry. I do want to make sure that you tell us what we can do to help advocate for people who are incarcerated to get the education they need this General Assembly session. So we need you to be real clear with us about that.
I can tell you that. Betsy Carr and I make a great team. Betsy is going to be our champion and upfront cheerleader in committees. My UVA team, we are going to support her, and we're going to walk hand in hand together working on that. Todd Pillion and Mamie Locke are in the Senate carrying that bill. So when Betsy says it's time to show up and testify, those are important things that they hear from folks. It's important.
Yes.
Yes. So yep. So when we tell you, my legislative office, I'm going to be helping, and we're going to be walking together on this. You can either, I know her amazing legislative aide and mine. I create lists of people who want to be notified when a bill is going to be heard. If you want to be added to that notification list, as soon as we get notice that it's coming up, we send a blast email out and say the bill is going to come up on Tuesday at 8 a.m. I will warn you, just like Betsy just said, it may be that we all get there and everything runs so late that we all have to come back and do it all over again on Thursday at 8 a.m. But that's what you can do. You can, if you are not represented by one of the two of us in this room, I encourage you to reach out to your representatives, to your legislator, to your delegate, to your senator, and let them know that this is an issue that's important to you and that you support that work. We don't have bill numbers yet. I know we'll be able to get those out, but we will be working very, very hard with groups from throughout Virginia You can also sign up Virginia Interfaith Center. They are supporting this bill. They will be tracking it. They will be showing up to testify. So if you want to get engaged with them and say, this is the bill I want to be an advocate for this year, I encourage you to visit legislators' offices, not just your own, but if you're willing to do it, come downtown, bring the fact sheets. We have a one-pager we've developed. Not this fact sheet, it's a different one just about our bill that we'll get out to Virginia Interfaith Center and they'll be able to use as well. So all things you can do.
So if I heard you correctly, you said that there are an inordinate number of people on a waiting list. There's like empty space in prisons that had been used for education that's not being used now. There aren't enough teachers. So what is your bill doing to address what issue to solve the problem?
So, a couple of things. One, it won't solve all problems. We have a shortage in all Department of Corrections positions. So, I visited just one, and they had an overall 40% vacancy rates in positions. And the way they're compensating for that is they're training everyone who's not in corrections officer position, their food employees, their teacher employees, everyone has to be part of the safety team, right? Because the number one goal is to keep every person in there safe and alive, right? That's the goal, everyone, whether you're incarcerated or you're working, safe and alive, number one top priority. We can't do anything else if we can't do that basic thing. So that they've really trained everybody to be part of that team, that we all have a piece of that. But a 40% vacancy rate is not great. And out of that, 60% of their teaching positions at that facility are vacant. So, what our bill is allowing, at least for those who were able to attain post secondary, which was a huge number, we're able to partner with the community colleges to serve in that capacity to provide that education. We're also really hoping it allows some of our nonprofits and our groups that are willing. This is what Betsy was so passionate about, allowing nonprofits and groups who can help with the basic education and the GED portion to be able to serve and walk alongside. We have a lot of retired educators that this is a great space if they were willing to come in and help fill, but we haven't had an infrastructure built out where we were able to bring those folks along. I will say, we also really went through a long time period where this was not a priority for DOC. And Chad Dotson has made it very clear as the new director, this is a priority for him. And there's been some, I'll call them some come to Jesus moments with with people in Department of Corrections of this is the direction we're going in. And education is important. And we should make it possible for everybody, no matter what their background is, to be able to come in and help us educate. So I think you're going to see some changes getting back to Betsy's original bill, which really started those basic ed GED, because she had some amazing groups who used to do work in our prisons, and then COVID hit and they couldn't come back again. And how do we get them back at the table? We have the space available to be there and to serve. So the bill is going to allow some of that flexibility to come back. But two, and a really big thing, is that we're not going to rely on teaching positions in DOC alone to teach. We still want them to hire teachers, because the best case scenario is that we have full-time teachers that work there that are working constantly. But we have an amazing community college system that is set up throughout the entire Commonwealth. We've had a decrease in students in those associate degree programs, and this is really an opportunity to allow those where we have teachers throughout the Commonwealth to come in and provide teaching in our Department of Corrections. So that's how we're looking at filling that gap. You're welcome.
And what are the operational aspects of getting people into the programs? I mean, is there outreach when people enter the prison system to allow them to understand what's available to them? Is there any counseling about next steps in education? How does that work?
So every person, when they first enter the Department of Corrections, there is some basic testing that's done to see where your education level is. So we do have that information. Once we have that basic information, it lets the Department of Corrections know where you're capable of going into different pathways. And it honestly, whether or not you get those services depends on where you're incarcerated. right? It's just very, very different. We have today 11 correctional facilities that have more educational opportunities than others. If you're in one of those, you're more likely that you're going to end up being told, "Hey, you qualify for this, and we have it available." If it's not available, you're probably not likely told that. What we're really looking at doing as part of this legislation today, DOC is using some basic education materials. If you don't have a high school diploma equivalent, we're working with the UVA. Part of the bill directs DOC to work with the UVA School of Education. We have one of the leading literacy experts in the world at UVA right now. And their team wants to evaluate the actual curriculum that's being used within DOC, to review it for evidence-based practices to make sure that we're using literacy materials that we're guaranteed to see improvements as fast as possible in folks. So that's step one, is that you take the basic, we see where you are. Step two, if you're not at a point where you can go into post-secondary, we have a better literacy screener and tool to figure out what you really need and gaps in order to catch you up. If we can fix that literacy and that reading component, the rest becomes much easier. So the bill sets out some of those basics for the starting point there. But we have about 11 correction facilities that are doing partnerships already with our community colleges. And our goal would be that we keep increasing those as they're ready and they're available. We set a goal in the bill of 5 years, a 5-year goal. So there's no mandate in the bill that says you have to go do X. We put together a task force, a work group to help walk alongside the community colleges and the Department of Corrections. And we set a 5-year goal to eliminate all wait lists in every program. Eliminate wait lists for basic education, eliminate wait lists for GED, eliminate wait lists for post-secondary access. So a 5-year goal to get there.
I have a question about your data sounds really exciting that ties education with future success. What about the person who gets out of jail at DRG who can't get the job even though he has the education? It sounds like something maybe has happened to make them more successful. But I knew a prisoner who was trained as an optician. He got the job, but then after they did the background check, they fired him because he had a past
Yeah,
history.
so that's a lot of work around barrier crimes. I carried a bill last year trying to address some of the barrier crimes to employment. That is where we still have a lot more work to do. So barrier crimes are where there's a list of crimes that prevent you from certain employment in certain jobs in Virginia. Last year, I brought a bill that really just tried to change the definition of violent crimes in Virginia, because there were 8 crimes that are listed in our state statute as violent. And if you commit a nonviolent crime versus violent, employment makes a big difference. Um, and I tried to remove 8 that are not violent. They're wrong, they're bad, they're crimes, but they are not violent and they're still categorized as such. I got out of the House and I got out of the Senate, and it did not make it positively across the governor's desk. So I'm hoping that we not only address something like that, those 8, but that we have a larger reform conversation about barrier crimes and how we look at folks being able to attain employment. So that is the goal, to help with that, because again, if there's a crime that's in your background preventing you from a job, it's very difficult to be successful if that's the case. We've had some success, but not quite as many. I don't have the data on the separate, but the addiction is a big piece of it. Betsy, did you have something you wanted to?
They're the watchdog for state government, how taxpayer money is spent, and how state agencies are run. And so this study will determine, I think it's probably going to be within the next year, is looking at how the state can, what it's doing to help people who are incarcerated so that they're more prepared when they get out to be active, fulfilled citizens, what we're doing, what we're not doing, and how we can improve and move on. So that kind of plays into what you were saying earlier.
All right,
Thank you,
last.
Betsy. And
Oh,
I have a little bit more time. We're good.
okay.
I
Last question.
actually to
Yeah.
I'm meeting with JLARC, the individuals who are doing that study this upcoming week. So it's we don't all serve on all the same commissions. So Betsy serves on JLARC, I do not. But one of the things that made me nervous, so sometimes when JLARC does a study, nobody is able to get legislation passed that's in that area. Um, yeah, so I called JLARC when I saw the report come out, and I said, "So look, I said, the prison education piece, you really don't need to study much. Like, we've got a solution with a bill coming up, but I'll tell you why we didn't include jails. It is so complicated because they're all independently run and it is much harder. But the average time served in a jail in the Commonwealth is 4 years. That's a long time. That's a long time. We could be educating a whole lot of folks, and we're 100% certain every one of them is coming back out into our community at some point along that 4 year journey. So I encouraged JLARC. I said I would have included jails in the bill draft if we thought we could figure it out, but it was too complicated. We could not figure out how to do it. So I said, why don't you narrow your focus? Because I told them up front, I said the answer is not the same for how you do education in prison as how you do education in jail. And you're trying to do one JLARC study on two very different systems. So I'm actually meeting with them this week. I said, I'll give you all my research. I did about a year and a half worth of research across the country in this area, anyways. And they were like, we wish we had talked to you before we started figuring this out. So hopefully, this bill on prison education goes through the General Assembly and is successful. And JLARC's able to help us figure out from a research perspective the jail piece because it's very complicated, but we have large numbers of men and women that we need to be helping in those spaces. I just couldn't figure out how to do it. It was so complex.
Last question.
Yes, you've described the imbalance between supply and demand for secondary education in our prison system and perhaps elsewhere. My question is about federal Pell Grants. Is there also a similar imbalance nationally in the availability of Pell Grants for the demand? And if so, how's the prison system going to fall in that zero sum game as being eligible?
So there are a large number of those grants that are not being used by anybody across the country today. I mean, I think one of the reasons we're pushing so hard on this issue is that there's a huge opportunity where there are grants that are available that are not being utilized. And I think the states that are first to figure this out, that their citizens will be the first to be able to take advantage of the growth in this area. There are also folks who I heard when I visited one of the correctional facilities, there's a family that's paying for their son to finish his education, right? He entered our prison system while he was in college, and he's continuing his education. His parents are paying for it while he finishes. So there's more than one pathway to achieve if we set it up where you can do that. Most of our correctional facilities wouldn't make it where you could continue that path because they don't have the ability to do it. This happened to be one of our correctional facilities with a very strong principal who oversees those. So the Pell Grant availability, there's a large number of them that are out there and still available. Virginia is very underutilized and our access to those. But I will say we have a lot of company in that because when you look across the country, very few states have figured out how to do the connection between community colleges and 4 year institutions inside of DOC. One is from a staffing issue. The second is technology. The technology piece is really, really hard to figure out. The number one safety issue right now in our prisons comes from technology because cell phones are not great. And when they get in, they cause a lot of problems with drugs. And they cause a lot of issues with violence. And so it's been a complicated thing to figure out how we could be doing a lot more distance learning if we could figure out the safety around that technology piece for our four-year institutions and our community colleges to be able to teach remotely. We're very fortunate. The leader of VITA, which is the head of all of our technology and information in the Commonwealth, is committed to try and help walk alongside DOC to figure out how to do that safely. But that's a piece of it. But no other state has figured those two things out really well either. There are some who've done a much better job in the technology safety piece, and hopefully we go and see what they've done to be able to use more technology in their prisons. And that is where Virginia could follow some others and do a better job.
And those of you that remember last year's Faith in Action on Criminal Justice will remember that we talked a lot about bringing communications, no-cost communications in. The technology intersects in the same, all this technology sort of intersects here. That also, if we were able to bring some infrastructure in for education, that also opens up some opportunity for no-cost communications as well. Delegate Coyner, thank you so much. Carrie, we appreciate you being here. Really grateful for that. If you want to stay engaged in this issue, please do reach out to your legislator. If you don't know if it's not Delegate Carr or Delegate Coyner, and you don't know who it is, you can simply Google "Who's my legislator" and it'll tell you who it is. You just have to plug in your address. Thanks so much for participating in this, and you can reach out to me as well if you want to get put in contact with Delegate Coyner or how to engage in this issue. Also, Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, of course, do an amazing job. They're leading on this issue on this particular spot. So please engage with them and Kim Bobo and their amazing team there. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thank you so much, Delegate Coyner. We really, really appreciate this amazing work you're doing. And I just wanted to follow up on what Sean said and let you know that the Community Engagement Steering Committee here at St. Paul's is working closely with Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy and Virginia Interfaith Power and Light to look at all of the legislation coming up and the places where we really want to encourage folks to make their voices heard from St. Paul's and advocate. And you're going to be getting an email at the beginning of January with opportunities for coming to advocacy days that were being hosted here at St. Paul's and elsewhere, and kind of get your General Assembly 101 toolkit. And then we're also, the next Faith in Action Forum on Sunday, January 19th, is going to be Kim Bobo, the Executive Director of Virginia Interfaith, here to kind of give us the, if you've never gone and talked to a legislator before, we're going to kind of get the toolkit for how do we do this work and how do we walk that really far distance across the street to go enter that building and go sit in our legislators' offices to use our faith to advocate for justice. So that's all coming.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you.
This was great.